What if one sentence could unravel everything you thought you knew? What if a quiet dinner with your daughter led to a truth so deep it cracked open your past and redefined your future? Max Montgomery, billionaire, innovator, widower, about to face the one thing even billions couldn't protect him from. The truth spoken from the heart of his only child. Max Montgomery wasn't the kind of man who stopped to admire sunsets. He was the kind of man who built companies from blueprints, sketched on napkins, turned ideas into empires, and closed billion-dollar deals in glass towers overlooking cities that never slept. At 45, Max was a force, sharp-suited, sharply spoken, and sharper still in mind. The world called him a visionary. Shareholders called him a genius. The media called him unstoppable. But to one person, he was simply Dad. Emily Montgomery, 16, with her mother's chestnut curls and questioning eyes, was the only soul who could slow Max down. The only one whose opinion wasn't swayed by Forbes lists or TED Talks. She was quiet, but never silent, observant, thoughtful. A girl raised in privilege, but with feet still planted in the soil of truth. That evening, Max had arranged something rare, a quiet dinner. No calls, no assistants, no emergencies, just father and daughter. A booth in a cozy, dimly lit Italian restaurant nestled between brownstones, a favorite of Max's late wife. The place where she used to order minestrone and laugh with her whole face. They hadn't been back since the accident. As the waiter poured sparkling water, Max asked the usual questions: school, friends, college plans. Emily answered politely, distractedly stirring her pasta. Then she looked up. There was something ancient in her eyes, older than her 16 years, a storm brewing just beneath the calm. "Dad," she said, her voice steady, "what if Mom's death wasn't an accident?" Max froze. Everything around him blurred: the music, the chatter, the flicker of candlelight. He blinked, certain he'd misheard. "What? I mean it," she said, her voice firmer now. "What if someone wanted to hurt you, and Mom's crash was the way they did it?" Silence, the kind that makes your soul hold its breath. Max leaned back, the air thick in his chest. He stared at her, searching for a trace of misunderstanding, a teen's imagination, a wild theory. But there was none of that, only calm, only clarity, only truth. Max couldn't sleep that night. Emily's words kept looping in his head, like a haunting melody he couldn't turn off. What if Mom's death wasn't an accident? He sat in the dark, surrounded by cold silence, in a home filled with all the warmth money could buy but none of the peace his heart needed. The house was vast, sleek, modern, the kind of place that graced magazine covers, but every room echoed with something missing. Lisa's laughter, her hums in the hallway, her quiet presence that once softened even Max's sharpest edges. He poured himself a glass of water, not wine. He hadn't touched a drink since the funeral, not because he feared the bottle, but because even numbness couldn't dull that kind of pain. He thought back to the night Lisa died. Rain, a phone call, a voice saying the car had lost control, slippery roads, a curve she never made. It had all sounded so, final, so untouchable. And Max had let it be just that, final. But now Emily had pulled open a door he hadn't even known was there. She had done it without accusation, without drama, just a sentence, a seed, and it was growing. The next morning, Emily came downstairs with a calm he couldn't understand. "Morning," she said, casually pouring cereal, like she hadn't dropped a truth bomb the night before that shook the very ground he stood on. Max studied her, how poised she was. He remembered when she was 4, asking why the moon followed their car. He remembered how she once cried because she thought the plants in the lobby were lonely at night. That same girl now asked questions that shook the walls of his reality. "About last night," he began. She looked up from her bowl. "I know it's a lot, Dad. You've been thinking about this." "For a while," she admitted. "I started reading Mum's journals last year." Max blinked. "Her journals?" Emily nodded. "They were in a box in the attic. I wasn't snooping, I wanted to know her." And something felt off. He sat down, heart thudding quietly. "What do you mean, off?" She wrote about things. Strange calls, people following her car, doors unlocked that she swore she locked. At first I thought maybe she was just stressed, but it kept happening, right up to the week she died. Max hadn't known. How hadn't he known? He rubbed his temples. Shame. slowly replacing shock. Lisa had once tried to talk to him about something bothering her. He remembered brushing it off, telling her to get more rest, saying the world wasn't out to get her. He had dismissed it. Emily pulled a notebook from her backpack, a weathered, leather-bound journal. She wrote, "I think Max is in danger, and I don't know who to trust." That was 5 days before the crash. He took the journal from her, hands trembling. It was Lisa's handwriting, her scent still faint in the page's lavender, and ink dot page after page. Notes, thoughts, worries. She had never spoken aloud. It was like hearing her whisper from beyond time. "I'm scared for him. There's something about the merger he's working on. He doesn't see the signs." The merger 5 years ago. Montgomery Enterprises had acquired a mid-sized cybersecurity firm, Orion Data Group. It was a deal that had gone through quickly, too quickly. Max had always thought of it as a clean acquisition. Now, doubt began to creep in. "Why didn't she tell me?" he whispered. Emily looked at him with a kind of quiet wisdom only grief can teach. Maybe she tried. The truth hit harder than any boardroom betrayal. Later that day, Max sat in his office, staring at the skyline. The city pulsed with life outside his window, but inside he felt still, like a man watching a storm build from behind glass. He made a call. "Caleb, it's Max Montgomery. I need a favor." Discreet, private. Caleb Hart had once been a private investigator before he joined corporate security. A man Max trusted not just with secrets, but with silence. "I need you to look into a crash 5 years ago. Lisa Montgomery." There was a pause. "You think something's off?" "I don't know," Max admitted. "That's the problem. I don't know anything anymore." He didn't tell Caleb about the journal. Not yet. He wasn't ready to say it aloud. Not until he was sure it wasn't just ghosts in old ink. Meanwhile, Emily kept reading, kept connecting dots. She found old voicemails, strange bank transactions, anonymous notes Lisa had kept in a shoebox. Clues that painted a picture of paranoia, but of someone slowly realizing she was a piece in a bigger game. And Max began to see his wife, not just as a memory, but as a warrior, someone who had fought quietly for the truth, even as the world told her to smile, to calm down, to stay quiet. He saw Emily as her echobot, also her evolution, stronger, sharper, unafraid to speak what needed to be said. The investigation didn't bring instant answers, just more questions. Caleb found missing traffic cam footage, a police report with inconsistencies, a mechanic who'd left the country days after Lisa's accident, threads that didn't tie up. And every one of them made Max's stomach turn, because if it was true, if someone had caused the crash, then someone had taken more than a wife. They had stolen years from a family, a future from a daughter, and Max hadn't seen it coming. One evening, Max sat on the porch with Emily. The sky was gold and lavender, the kind Lisa used to paint in her sketchbooks. Emily held a photo in her lap, a picture of the three of them, at a charity gala, all smiles. "I used to think," Emily said softly, "that maybe I was just making it up, because missing her hurts less when I have a reason." Max looked at her, heart heavy. "You're not making it up. You believe me now?" He nodded. "I believe her, and I believe you." She smiled, then a small, sad smile. "I just want to know why." So did he, because somewhere out there, someone knew the answer. Someone had watched Lisa's car spin on a wet road and walked away clean. And Max Montgomery, who built empires, who moved markets, had finally found the one deal he couldn't broker with money. Only truth, only courage, only love. That night, Emily fell asleep with Lisa's journal beside her, and Max sat alone with his thoughts, listening not to the noise of the world, but to the quiet places he had ignored for too long, places where his wife had whispered warnings, places where his daughter now carried the torch. He wasn't the same man he was a week ago, and he never would be again. To uncover the truth would mean facing powerful enemies, challenging narratives written by men in tailored suits, and protecting the only thing that still mattered, his daughter's belief that justice could still be found. Max looked at the journal one more time, and in the margins of one page, Lisa had written, "If anything happens to me, don't let silence win. You always said truth was power. Prove it." He would, even if it broke him, because love demands courage. And now, he finally had it. It was strange how a single question could flip the entire world upside down. Max had faced government inquiries, shareholder revolts, hostile takeovers, but nothing rattled him like his daughter's voice echoing in his mind, steady and sure. What if Mum's death wasn't an accident? Since that dinner, Max's world had become a quiet war zone, but unlike the corporate wars he'd waged in boardrooms and press conferences, this one was fought in shadows, in late-night journal entries, in glances exchanged over breakfast, in the uneasy silences between father and daughter who were chasing ghosts together. He didn't want to believe it. He needed to believe Lisa's death was just a tragedy, a horrible, senseless act of fate. But Lisa's words in her journal whispered, louder than reason. He couldn't ignore them anymore. The morning sun stretched across the kitchen island as Max stared at his untouched coffee. Emily sat across from him, notebook open, eyes scanning a timeline she had created. On the surface she looked like a teenager preparing for an exam, but Max knew better. She was hunting for the truth. She circled a date with her pen. Look at this. For days before the crash, Mum met with someone named Turner. She wrote, "He warned me, told me, Max's partners aren't who he thinks they are." Max frowned. Turner. Emily slid a photo across the counter. It was a scanned page from the journal, with Lisa's precise cursive underlined in red. She never wrote a full name, just a Turner, no context. He leaned back, thinking hard. Turner. That name scratched something in his memory. Faint, buried beneath years of mergers and meetings. Then it clicked. Alan Turner, Max muttered. He was a consultant. During the Orion deal, specialized in corporate risk. He flagged something about offshore accounts, something I thought was just procedural noise. Legal said it was handled. I never heard from him again. Emily's eyes narrowed. So he warned Mum, and disappeared. Max's stomach tightened. I haven't thought about him in years. Maybe it's time to find him. It was one thing to consider that Lisa's death wasn't accidental. It was another to chase the possibility into the unknown. But Max had made up his mind. This wasn't just about grief anymore. It was about truth. He called Caleb again, this time with urgency. In his voice, "I need everything you can find on Alan Turner. Old records, emails, addresses, whatever's left." Caleb's voice came back cautious. "You think he knows something? I think he knew something, and someone made sure he vanished before I could listen." A quiet pause. "I'll see what I can dig up." As the call ended, Max looked at Emily, so young, yet standing strong beside him in a storm she didn't create. "You sure you want to be in the middle of this?" Emily didn't flinch. "I already am." Later that day, Caleb called back. "Got something. Turner's last known address is in upstate Vermont. Retired. Off the grid. No digital footprint in 5 years. He dropped out of every system right after the Orion merger finalized." Max didn't hesitate. "Send me the address." He didn't tell Emily he was leaving. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he didn't want her exposed to something he couldn't yet predict. The drive took hours. Through city traffic, past corporate skylines, into the quiet of winding country roads. The deeper he went, the more the world seemed to peel away layers of noise replaced by birdsong and wind. The house was modest, wooden, weather-worn, tucked into a slope near the trees. No mailbox, no visible cameras. Just a quiet place for someone who clearly didn't want to be found. Max knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder. Then the door creaked open, not from his knock, but from someone on the other side. A man stood in the shadows, tall, gray-haired, wary eyes. "I'm not selling anything," he said. "I'm not buying," Max replied. "I'm looking for Alan Turner." The man didn't respond, just studied him. "I'm Max Montgomery." That got a reaction. The man stepped back slowly, opening the door wider. "You've got 5 minutes." Inside was simple. A wood stove, a single chair, piles of newspapers, the kind of place where a man went to disappear. "I thought you'd show up sooner," Alan said, his voice like gravel. Max sat cautiously. "My wife died 5 years ago." "I know. You warned her." Alan sighed, rubbing his temple. "I told her the truth. She was the only one who listened." Max clenched his fists. "Why didn't you come to me?" "I did. In my report, I told your legal team. They buried it. I was asked to resign 3 days later." "You think the crash?" "I don't think." "Max, I know. Lisa figured it out. She told me someone close to you was manipulating the deal, feeding information to competitors. The crash wasn't random. It was a message." Max felt the floor tilt beneath him. "Why didn't you say anything publicly?" Alan looked up, tired. "Because no one would have listened. You had become a golden boy, untouchable. And because I was scared, they don't just silence whistleblowers in boardrooms anymore, they erase them quietly. Max stared at him, heart pounding. So who was it? Who did this? Alan looked at him carefully, then said, just one name. Max's world shattered. It was someone he trusted, someone he still spoke to, someone who had been in his home after Lisa died. He left Alan's cabin with a name burning in his mind like a brand. On the way back, he called Emily, told her everything. No more shielding, no more silence. She listened quietly, then asked one question. So, what do we do now? Max answered without hesitation. We expose them, but this time, it wouldn't be a press release or a courtroom battle. This was personal. He and Emily weren't just searching for justice anymore. They were preparing for war, not with vengeance, but with truth. And truth, Max now understood, was the most powerful weapon they had left. Asterisk, he stared at the name written in ink on the notepad, like it was poison. Landon Gray. Max had known Landon since college. They had built Montgomery Enterprises side by side, long nights coding in dorm rooms, surviving on caffeine and ambition. When Max rose to become the face of the empire, Landon remained just behind him, the trusted partner, the quiet strategist, the man Max once called a brother. And now, according to Alan Turner, the man who had betrayed them all. The drive home from Vermont was slow, not because of traffic, but because Max kept pulling over, gripping the steering wheel, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror, trying to breathe through the tightness in his chest. He kept asking himself the same thing. How did I not see it? When he finally arrived home, Emily was waiting. She rushed down the stairs, barefoot, journal in hand, face pale but determined. I cross-referenced Turner's name with Mum's notes, she said without waiting for him to sit. There's something else. Max closed the door behind him. What? She mentioned a file, a document Landon didn't want her to see. She called it the fuse, said it would blow everything open. Max's eyes narrowed. Where? She didn't say. Just the place we kept our vows. For a second, he blinked, lost in time. Then it hit him like a bolt of lightning. The lighthouse. Years ago, on the coast of Maine, he and Lisa had exchanged private vows in a secluded lighthouse they'd restored together. It wasn't part of any ceremony, just the two of them, a handful of candles, and promises spoken into the sea breeze. She had loved that place. It was her sanctuary. No one else knew about it. Pack a bag, Max said. We're leaving tonight. They drove through the night, father and daughter, headlights cutting through the dark like twin beacons chasing memory. Emily curled up, with Lisa's journal in her lap, her breath slow, her presence grounding. Max kept glancing at her between turns, silently marveling at her strength. She didn't complain, didn't ask how long it would take. She just believed, and that gave Max more strength than any boardroom ever had. By morning, the lighthouse appeared through the mist, tall and weathered, rising like a sentinel from the rocks. It hadn't changed. Max unlocked the door with the old key Lisa had insisted they keep. The air inside smelled like salt and dust, and something else, something familiar. They searched the small rooms together, hands running along shelves, lifting dusty boxes. Then Emily stopped suddenly, crouching by a loose floorboard near the corner of the old bed. Here, she whispered. She pried the board loose with steady fingers, revealing a small, sealed envelope beneath. Max knelt beside her, heart racing. He opened it. Inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten note. If you're reading this, I wasn't wrong. Max clutched the note like it might disappear. The letters were Lisa's, soft, clean, steady. I knew she left something, Emily whispered. She knew it wasn't safe anywhere else. Back in the car, Max plugged the USB into his laptop. Files loaded slowly, encrypted documents, transaction trails, internal memos, all pointing to one undeniable truth. Landon had orchestrated the entire betrayal. 5 years ago, he had been approached by a foreign investment group eager to get inside Montgomery Enterprises. He had made a deal behind Max's back, slipping them code, strategy, and influence. When Lisa found traces of it, she didn't go to the police. She came to Landon, hoping she was wrong. She wasn't. The documents proved it. An email thread where Landon panicked, saying Lisa knows, I'll handle it, followed by a wire transfer, followed by silence. Emily sat in stunned quiet. Max stared at the screen, fists clenched, breath ragged. All this time, I want to go public, Emily said suddenly. All of it. I want people to know. Max looked at her, seeing not a child, but a fierce, brave woman who reminded him so much of Lisa it hurt. We will, he promised. But not yet. Why not? Because this isn't just about the past anymore. It's about protecting the future. If Landon's still working with those people, others are in danger too. We do this wrong, and it disappears. Just like Lisa. That night, they stayed in the lighthouse. Parks couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the beam cut through the fog, remembering how Lisa used to say it was her favorite sound in the world, the slow, patient rhythm of light in darkness. He opened her journal again. Toward the back, she had written something in bold, capital letters. Truth doesn't die in the dark. It waits. That line echoed in him. He realized then it wasn't just about exposing Landon. It was about becoming the kind of man Lisa had believed he could be. A man who didn't just build companies, but protected people, who listened, who saw. He wasn't there yet, but he would be. The next morning, Max and Emily drove back to the city. They didn't return to the mansion. They went to a safe house Caleb had arranged. Small, quiet, secure. Emily didn't ask questions. She just unpacked the USB and began sorting. The documents will need a lawyer, she said, one who can't be bought. Max nodded, and a journalist, someone with reach. They began to build a case, like assembling a puzzle that had sat for years in the shadows, just waiting for someone brave enough to try. In the days that followed, Caleb discovered surveillance, footage from the week of Lisa's crash that had never been logged, showing Landon's car parked across the street from the garage where Lisa's brakes were serviced. More proof, more rage, but Max held it in. This wasn't about vengeance, it was about finishing what Lisa started. He found the perfect person to help, Rachel Lavin, AN, investigative reporter who had exposed major pharmaceutical fraud years ago, a woman known for her fearlessness and her integrity. When they showed her the file, she sat in stunned silence. Then she said, I want the story, but I want her to help tell it. She looked at Emily. Emily hesitated, then nodded. Max watched her, heart full. She had become the voice Lisa never got to be. That night, as they prepared for the next steps, Max sat with his daughter on the apartment balcony, watching city lights flicker like stars. You know, he said quietly, you saved me. Emily looked at him, confused. You were the only one brave enough to ask the question I didn't want to face. She smiled faintly. Mom would have done the same. Max nodded. She'd be proud of you. They sat in silence for a long while, pit the kind that doesn't need to be filled, because now they both understood something deeper than truth. They had been broken by the same loss, but they were healing in the same light. And the storm that had taken Lisa was no longer a mystery. It was a fight they were ready to finish. Together. There's a moment just before the world changes when everything goes quiet. Max felt that silence now. He stood backstage at a news studio in Manhattan, heart thudding under his suit. On the other side of the curtain, Rachel Levin's voice carried through the earpiece. The segment was already trending across social media, scheduled to air live in just 3 minutes. This wasn't a business launch or an IPO announcement. This wasn't about profits or shareholders. This was the moment he turned on someone he once trusted more than his own reflection. And this time, he wasn't standing alone. Emily stood beside him, calm, her hands folded tightly around Lisa's old journal. She wasn't here as a symbol. She was the co-author of the truth. Max looked down at her. You sure? She didn't even blink. We're already in it. Let's finish it. The producer gave them a nod. They stepped into the light. The set was sterile and clinical spotlights, glass desks, cameras mounted on arms, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the weight of the story they were about to share with the world. Rachel introduced them, her voice steady. What you're about to hear, she said to the camera, is a story about loss, betrayal, and the courage to confront the unimaginable. She turned to Max. Let's begin with Lisa. Max breathed in and spoke. He didn't read a script. He didn't rehearse lines. He told the truth about Lisa's accident, about the unanswered questions, about the journal, the files, the buried warnings. Then he passed the baton to Emily. She opened Lisa's journal, reading her mother's words aloud, simple, haunting lines that described fear, confusion, and a determination to protect her family, no matter what. By the time they finished, the studio was silent. Rachel spoke next, her voice subdued. We have verified every document provided by the Montgomerys. Our investigation confirms the existence of covert partnerships, suppressed safety reports, and falsified communications involving senior executives, including Landon Gray. The camera panned back to Max. Why come forward now? Rachel asked. Max looked straight into the lens. Because someone I loved gave her life trying to protect the truth. And because silence almost destroyed us. The segment ended, but the world had only just started to respond. Within minutes, #Justice for Lisa trended globally. News outlets picked up the story. Emails flooded Montgomery Enterprises' press inbox. Journalists camped outside the corporate headquarters. Board members held emergency sessions. But what shook Max most wasn't the media frenzy. It was Landon's response. 2 hours after the segment aired, Max received an encrypted email. "You don't know what you're doing. Stop this before it's too late. We both lose." No denial. No apology. Just a threat. Max closed the laptop slowly. He's scared. Emily looked at him. Or he's dangerous. They were both right. The next few days were a whirlwind. Employees came forward with more evidence. Anonymous whistleblowers sent documents Lisa had likely never seen. Rachel's team published a 3-part expose that painted the full picture. Landon's empire began to crack, but something didn't sit right with Max. Landon was too quiet, too calculated. For a man whose reputation was imploding, he wasn't lashing out. He was waiting. For what? One night, Max couldn't sleep. He sat at the safe house desk, flipping through Lisa's journal again, searching for anything they might have missed. And then he saw it. In a margin, Lisa had scribbled, "If they can't silence the truth, they'll try to rewrite it." Max froze. He grabbed the encrypted drive from the safe and checked the folder again. There were files he hadn't opened yet, ones labeled Orion Black Contracts and Phoenix Contingency. Inside were backup documents Lisa had obtained from an offshore server, unedited memos, true versions of company transactions, and most importantly, with hidden clauses linking Landon to a shell corporation named Carson Tech, which was currently bidding to buy out a division of Montgomery Enterprises. It was a backdoor play, a last move. If Landon succeeded, he wouldn't just survive, he'd win. The next morning Max met with the company board, not as their CEO but as a witness. He laid everything on the table, the corruption, the threats, the shell corporations. He presented the original contracts Lisa had, unearthed ones even the company's legal team had never seen. The board was stunned. A few members broke down in tears. When Max finished, he looked at them calmly and said, "I don't want revenge. I want the company to remember why it exists, to create, to help, to lead with integrity. If that's still possible." There was a long silence. Then the board voted. Unanimously, Landon Gray was removed from every position of authority. A criminal investigation was formally opened, and a motion was passed to launch a Lisa Montgomery Foundation to fund women in tech, whistleblower protection programs, and ethics reforms in business leadership. Later that evening, Max returned to the safe house and found Emily asleep on the couch, the journal resting on her chest like a shield. He sat beside her and watched the light of the city flicker across her face. Something inside him had shifted. For years, he'd believed success meant building walls around pain, that to survive loss, he had to bury it beneath titles and strategy and control. But now, he saw the truth. Strength wasn't the absence of grief, it was the courage to live with it tanned, still love fiercely, still tell the truth, even when your voice shakes. He whispered to her, though she couldn't hear him, "Thank you, not just for standing beside him, but for being the reason he remembered how to fight for something real." She stood alone on the stage, the spotlight soft on her face, her voice steady despite the tremble in her fingers. "My mother once wrote, you can lose your way in grief, but you can also find your truth there." The auditorium, filled with students, entrepreneurs, journalists, and families, held its breath. Emily Montgomery had never spoken in public before this, but now, at 18, she stood at the opening of the Lisa Montgomery Foundation's first national summit, held in the very company her mother helped inspire, and that she and her father had just reclaimed. She was a brilliant woman, Emily continued, not just because of her ideas or her education, but because she paid attention to what others ignored. When she started noticing something wrong, she didn't look away, even though it cost her everything. Max watched from the wings, heart full, eyes damp. The journey to this stage hadn't been easy. After the expos went public, Landon was indicted on federal charges, including conspiracy, corporate fraud, and obstruction. His overseas partners disavowed him. His assets were frozen. The silence he had once used to control others was now a cage closing in around him. Max had testified in 2 hearings, so had Emily, but their real focus had shifted. While the legal system pursued justice, they pursued something else, something Lisa would have wanted more than revenge: impact. They restructured the company, appointed new leadership, donated a significant portion of Max's shares to the foundation. The Lisa Montgomery Fellowship launched 6 scholarships, funded 5 investigative reporting grants, and helped 3 young whistleblowers find protection within their industries. Emily was the soul of the movement, her writing, her voice, her quiet strength. She wasn't trying to be Lisa, she was honoring her. That night, after the summit, Max and Emily sat on the rooftop of their new apartment. They didn't return to the mansion. They didn't need the symbols of power anymore. Now, they wanted meaning. Below them, the city moved like a tide of lights and possibilities. Max passed Emily a gift-wrapped box. "What's this?" she asked, curious. "Something she wanted you to have." Inside was a delicate silver pendant, shaped like a lighthouse dot. Emily stared at it, her breath catching. "It was hers," Max said softly. "She had it made after we got married. Said it reminded her of where we found our courage." Emily closed her hand around it. "Do you think she'd be proud?" Max didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, this brave, brilliant daughter, who had asked the one question that changed everything. "Every single day," he said finally. "Not just for what we did, but for who you became while doing it." For a while, they just sat there in silence. But it wasn't the kind of silence that comes from pain. It was the kind that comes when 2 people finally understand how far they've come, and how much further they can go together. Months passed. Emily began writing a book, part memoir, part investigative narrative. It was called The Quiet Light, named after the journal entry Lisa wrote on the eve of her final day. "Let truth be the quiet light that never stops shining, even when no one is looking." The book became a bestseller. Max stepped away from the day-to-day of the company. Instead, he taught ethics seminars at universities, volunteered as a mentor to young entrepreneurs, and gave lectures about rebuilding after loss, not just in business, but in life. He had learned that real leadership wasn't about control, it was about listening. 1 year later, on the anniversary of Lisa's death, they returned to the lighthouse, not to mourn, but to celebrate. They repainted the walls, lit candles, read a few of Lisa's favorite poems. Emily placed the silver pendant on the window ledge, just under the rotating light. "It belongs here," she said. Max nodded. Before they left, Emily looked out at the ocean. "Dad, yeah, do you ever wonder if maybe Mom knew how strong we could be? Like maybe she left all this behind, not just to tell us the truth, but to show us what we're capable of." Max looked out at the waves. "I think she always knew, even when we didn't." As they drove away, the lighthouse beam swept across the road one last time, just as steady as it had been all those years ago. Not loud, not blazing, but constant, a quiet light. And now, they carried it forward, not just as a memory, but as a mission. Not just for justice, but for hope. Because the most powerful stories aren't the ones that end in revenge. They're the ones that begin again with purpose. And sometimes, all it takes is one question, one voice, one moment of courage to turn darkness into direction. Lisa had started it. Max and Emily finished it. But the truth, it was never really about the end. It was always about the light that came after.